Hello and welcome folks to Agathos Flight School, and today I will finally take a look at Warthunder and how it compares to the real Mustang. Before we do that, there were good reasons why I did not include this comparison in the first video. One was the video was already pretty long and I don't want to make that even longer. And the second more important reason is that I personally think it's not really fair to compare Warthunder to the two other simulations and the real Mustang. And the reason for this is simplifications. Warthunder is at best, and you know, I really like Warthunder, even though I haven't played it for maybe a year and had to update the client for this video, and these were the first rounds in the Mustang for about probably a year or even more. I really like Warthunder. I still like it, but in all honesty, Warthunder in simulation modes is at best a soft simulation. And this is because Warthunder's developers choose to make some simplifications. And these simplifications put on some limitations that in a nutshell simply do not allow you to fly the Warthunder Mustang like you fly the real Mustang. And this is for those too long to read, don't want to go further in the video. Very simple, in a nutshell, the opinion here. You cannot fly the Warthunder Mustang like you fly the real one. So, period. Does not work. And now let's take a look at the three main reasons why that is. Reason number one: simplified engine modeling and operation. Also, Warthunder offers in the simulation mode the manual engine mode, where you can control throttle, propeller and mixture individually and manually. The game engine actually cannot simulate properly the power settings you want to fly. For instance, if I try to set 37 inches, 2300 RPM for cruising speed, this simply will not work. The power set at that level in Warthunder, I have not enough power to get the speed I get in the real Mustang. Actually anything below full throttle takeoff power, 61 inches in the Mustang, and propeller full forward is off by a good margin. For instance, you know, the short field takeoff procedure is 55 inches manifold pressure in the modern day civilian operated real Mustang, and there you get 3000 RPM. I'm not really sure that Warthunder's Mustang actually on manual control with prop full forward and 55 inches reaches 3000 RPM. I think the RPM moves no further than 2900. So it's a very strong limitation. The second limitation is trim. Trim is simplified in Warthunder, and Warthunder does not model trim tabs on the plane. It just, when you trim an axis in Warthunder, it trims your control stick or your rudders, depending on if you trim aileron, elevator or jaw axis. And so when there are trim changes, and I compare that to the real plane, I cannot say if the trim change is the same amount or not the same amount, if it's too strong, if it's too weak. The only thing I can say is if the trim change is in the proper direction. So for instance, if I drop the gear and in the real Mustang the plane then becomes nose heavy and you have to trim tail heavy, I can see if I have to trim the Warthunder Mustang tail heavy if I drop the gear. I can't say nothing more. So also a very strong limitation on how to compare the performance of Warthunder's Mustang, especially in the things I can compare the plane to the real one here. And the third one is systems. In this case, flaps. Flaps in Warthunder are also simplified. The Mustang only has 4 positions: up, combat, takeoff, landing. The real Mustang has 2 additional settings. And that's because in the real Mustang you have up 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees and 50 degrees. I've taken a look and it seems the 30 degrees and 40 degrees miss in Warthunder. And so here I cannot really fly the pattern like I do in the real Mustang, because I simply cannot set the flaps to 30 degrees when I turn into base. I have to either stay at takeoff, which is 20 degrees roughly, or I go to full flaps, which is 50 degrees. And everything in between I missed. So you see here that a comparison is not really possible. With that in the background, let's move a little bit further and let's say, what can we compare? And what will I compare? I will compare when this plane starts to roll. I will do a short field takeoff. Rolling takeoff is not possible with the ground model in Warthunder and its limitations, especially at slow speed. Then I will do a pattern. I will not go into an overhead pass, because this would only make sense if I could replicate the power settings from the real plane, but I cannot do. And then I will do a landing, a wheel landing, and see how that works out. And how for the procedures and for the comparison videos, take the links in the description to the other videos so you know what I compare Warthunder to and how this comparison is done. And what I will do is pretty much, as best, I try to replicate the power settings, but where this is not possible because of the simplified engine modeling, I will simply move on to replicate the speeds and attitude, so that I get a rough idea how the plane in Warthunder feels at that speed, and if at that speed it has roughly the same attitude, same horizontal picture. And then I will do a landing and just can comment on the sense of flight itself. So it's a very simple comparison. So with that said in advance, let's go into the sequence. So here we are in the cockpit. I prepare the plane, go to manual engine mode. I will have to then move the prop full forward before I start the engine, and I have to put in some trim. Also, I cannot say if the amount of trim is comparable, at least the direction is roughly what it is in the real Mustang. So we have some right rudder in there. And the first thing we will do after the engine runs up is also note at which speed the engine stabilizes after you run it up. It's pretty low, it's almost only 500 RPM. So already here, not sure if the real one will go so low, or if you want to run the engine so low. But then I will move in increments of roughly 100 RPM, and surprisingly, at least here, the Mustang starts to move at 1100, 1150. But I have no idea how much engine power I actually have here. And if you look at the manifold pressure, you will see that this is already pretty high at that setting. And then we will go for the short field takeoff. I try to get to 2300 RPM. And look, we are already over 40 inches of manifold pressure. And the brakes are too weak, at least to hold 2300 RPM. The plane moves. The takeoff run itself is nice. Here everything looks right, feels right. It lifts off at a proper speed. Everything looks good. What immediately might be there is when I go to the climb power setting of 46 inches, 2700 RPM, the plane feels underpowered here. And so I will try to stabilize the climb and get a decent climb rate, but kind of difficult. So here I actually switch from flying to the numbers to flying to the speed and attitude I want. And then we go and turn into the downwind. In the downwind, as I said, if you look, you will note in the entire pattern that the manifold pressure is way higher than in the real plane. So no comparison here, does not even come close. I have to just keep the manifold pressure on the gorge pretty high to have enough power so the plane does not sink or falls out of the sky. So I prepare For the landing, flaps go down, limiting speed for the gear, and then you put the gear down at some point. There it goes. The speed, it's currently 155 to 160 miles indicated. It's really, you need a lot of manifold pressure to keep the plane at the speed. So there is really, there the Warthunder is really off. Now we come to the point where it's quite difficult to use the proper procedures because I simply miss 2 stages of flaps. So what I do here is I go with the takeoff flaps, and then somewhere in that turn to base and then turn to final, I put down full flaps. But I try to have a good airspeed control. And the descent itself and how the plane is stable, feels actually, the sense of flight is pretty good. And at one point, Warthunder really surprised me, and this is when you will see the wheel landing. So the tendencies in trim also are right. When I drop the gear, plane becomes nose heavy and I have to trim tail heavy, the same with the flaps. The direction is correct, the amount, I cannot make a judgment because it simply works differently. Same with the right 4 degrees right rudder, simply cannot set them here. And the surprising thing is here, note this is my 2nd wheel landing in the Mustang after a very long time, and I've not done many wheel landings in Warthunder. Look how smooth the plane touches the ground, and this surprised me. At least at landing speed, this is way better than DCS and IL-2. The plane stays way more stable. It does not bounce so much in the landing gear struts, and so the touchdown is pretty good. But here immediately you see the weakness when the plane becomes slower, and everyone knows that from Warthunder. The plane feels like it's skidding on ice. And because also the brakes in Warthunder are weaker than in the other simulations, and they are weaker than in the real plane, you don't have a lot of directional control here. So, and with that, shutting down the engine, we can come to a short conclusion. But I think I've taken most away in my pre-comments. And this is Mustang in Warthunder flies nice. The sense of flight is still great. I really like it. But overall, it is not really comparable to the real Mustang, and this is very simply not due to the aerodynamics or the flight model itself of the airframe and the attitude, but it's because of the simplifications in the system simulation. And this means engine management, systems management, and trim management. And so I enjoyed it. It's still nice to fly, but it's not really comparable. And if you fly in Warthunder and you have fun there, great, but it's not really the real thing. The simplifications are simply too much. But on the other hand, the sense of flight is still great, and maybe that's a result of the simplifications, because you have to. One thing one has to keep in mind. DCS and IL-2, with the more complex simulation approach they take on those planes, also have more areas where they can deviate from the real behavior. And in that case, although they are overall the better simulation because they simulate more of the aspects and put more effort in all of these, the result might not really feel as good. And for me, the premier point here is how stable in Warthunder the plane flies. And this might be a result of the simplified trim modeling. But now that I've flown again in Warthunder, that is maybe the most astonishing point with that simple flight model and the simple simulation. That stability actually feels pretty good to the real plane, because the real plane is not unstable. It's not nervous. Sure, you have to retrim it, but it's not wobbling. It's not itchy twitchy, you know? And these are effects you see in DCS and IL2. And I think this is simply because they are more complex, and to some extent, Warthunder with its simpler approach here does not run so much into issues which you cannot avoid with a simulation on a PC. And this is actually your interface, you know, your controls. How when you make a control input over your stick, how when you change the trim via an axis, how you put in some degree of rudder and so on, the plane reacts and how you react. You know, the issue I meant when I said with the rudder, there's a tendency to over control. And the more simpler model of Warthunder, I think, simply avoids much of that over controlling. And so the result feels pretty good, and so enjoy it. With that said, here at the end, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope the Warthunder community found it interesting. Also, the rest of the flight simulation community found it interesting. And with the conclusion here coming to an end, I also have to make a note about the future of that channel and Warthunder especially. I noticed, especially now, with this video going on and me flying again in Warthunder, that I've moved on. Warthunder is nice. It's a great simulation. It's a great game. It's probably the best entry point if you want to take a look into especially VR flight simulations and enjoy air combat. But for me, other aspects have become more important, and this is foremost the system simulation. I really enjoy going through handbooks, using the things from the real documents and the real planes, hop into VR and replicate them there. And so I'm not so much more anymore interested in air combat and improving there. It's more like I want to experience a plane. And this is what Warthunder simply cannot do because of the simplifications. I cannot really hop there into a Spitfire or a Mustang and enjoy the complexity or simplicity of the systems. And so for me, the future will actually lie more in DCS. And luckily, I've got all of the World War II models now, thanks to Eagle Dynamics and how they like the comparison. And so I will make some tutorials for all of the World War II planes. Also updating the P-51 tutorial, because I don't have one for DCS 2.5. And so the shift here of the flight school will move over to DCS, surely. But anything that works in DCS will generally work in Warthunder. It will generally work in IL2 if you fly to proper procedures in DCS that I explain in the videos, and you can transfer those things pretty easily to IL2 and Warthunder, and in this case I think enhance your experience with those simulations. So see you here again in the future, then with some nice little DCS content. Bye bye, always happy hunting, your Agathos.